Hey, my name is Andrew Kaplan, and you're in the middle of listening to a 7-part mini-series going behind the scenes with the Navattic growth team. We explored all kinds of things that typically don't get shared publicly in the growth community. We talked about how they think about growth, how they set their strategy, their operating system, what they track, what they don't track, how often they share internally to drive alignment, and we talked about some of their biggest challenges, their fears, and their speed bumps along the way. Let's jump back in where we left off. So as we start to wrap up here, a couple other things I wanted to ask about. One is going to be big bets, because I feel like the growth community loves taking big swings. Everybody's trying to take bigger swings. Their bosses want them to take bigger swings. So I'd love to know, what are the big swings that y'all are going to take this year?
Yeah, I've sort of already touched on this a little bit, but I think biggest thing for us is figuring out how do we get that cohort of people who interested in Navattic, know it, maybe they're really excited about it, but their boss isn't as excited, or their CFO, and make it so they can still try it out, get a little taste for it, and then maybe get some data before they make that pitch.
So what are we talking about? So you're talking around it. What does that mean? What's the bet here?
Potentially some like PLG-ish self-serve, just trying to see like, is that something works with our product, right? I think everyone thinks PLG is going to be like the solution to everything, but doesn't think, is my product a PLG product? So first, trying to validate that. And then 2, just like, how do we make it super simple for someone to create a demo and then prove value before having to buy a whole annual contract?
Yeah. And what would be something that might derail y'all from taking that bet for this year?
Well, we just talked about expectation, other department alignments, right? It's scary changing everything, especially when things are overall going well. Like, we're really lucky. So it's like, well, why would we change something that's working?
Yeah.
I think we also are trying to approach it in a way where turning the dial slowly at first, just to get comfort and buy-in, and we're not just totally opening up the doors for a bet like that. So I think that's been a little helpful as well, as we're gonna slowly ramp up on this and build comfort, understand how people interact, look at the data, and then let that be what informs how we actually take this bet.
Yeah. There's a pro and the con to doing it that way, right? So the pro is that everybody's comfortable and gets to come along, and that no department is surprised by the results, and the results happen when they're early enough to take action. The con is that means typically you learn a little slower. And I'm curious to know, how did you land on that way of operating versus trying to just go fast and, hey, we'll just change it if we're wrong type of mentality? And I'm asking for a specific reason, because I think there's a lot of folks that aren't sure which one of those. And they know the pros and the cons, but they just don't know, should I do it this way or this way? And so how y'all think about it, I think, is really interesting.
It's funny that you said that the way we're approaching it is almost making it slower, because in some ways I feel like it made us be able to try it a lot faster.
Ah, okay.
That's kind of why we wanted to approach it this way. We're like, what is the simplest, quickest way we can get an MVP out without maybe needing to address every single concern and mitigating all those concerns by saying, we're only doing this small portion. So versus having to think of every single department, what they're going to, obviously we took that into account, but having to think of everything that could go wrong, we could control it in a small dialed way and be like, okay, if something breaks for one user, it's one user, we can fix it, versus if we launched it to 100 users, well, shoot, that's 100 upset users.
Yeah, I agree. I think that just let us start much faster. I think there's just inherently more comfort when you can say, this is exactly what the segment is going to look like. This is who's in the segment. And it's this small percentage of our total traffic. Let's try it out and get some learnings. And I think people are much more willing to agree to that versus when you're hey, let's just throw it on the site and go 50-50. So it just felt easier to start. But I think there is a trade-off too. We are getting less learning, but I agree. I think we're just able to start faster.
That's a cool perspective. One of the other things I was curious to get your perspective on is, when would you think about adding a third member of the team? How would you know when it's time? How did those conversations happen at Navattic? Where's your head at as we enter kind of the Q2 of 2024?
I'd say one of the hardest and most fun parts of working at Navattic, as I talked about, we're a small company. So hires are a big deal, because you have to think every single hire I'm getting is potentially this department you're taking away from. So you're not just thinking about your internal priorities. You really have to constantly take a step back and think of the whole company. And you're like, where is the biggest bottleneck right now? Talking about those signals, where are we hearing the most signals that's being stopped because, maybe we don't have enough product people to work on this specific feature, or, we're hearing a lot of problems with churn. So it's we need to invest in CS. I don't have a perfect answer for when we're going to invest more, because honestly, it's not just determined on us. I'd love to say in a perfect world, when we hit this point and we scale this point, that's when I want to bring on someone. But being at such a small company, it kind of depends. And if we become a huge bottleneck, kind of when I was talking about bringing on Ramen, it was becoming not a huge issue, but just like a constant thing that we wanted to do growth experiments, but we couldn't. Like it was a constant pain point that just kept coming up, and it became obvious. And so I think when there's that pain point again of we're hitting our limitations, there's problem that keeps occurring. And hopefully the rest of the business, there's not something else that's more pressing. That's what might make sense for us.
I think it's kind of a cool perspective. And this comes back with y'all being not bootstrapped, but having what'd you call it, a supersede round?
Yeah.
Yeah. So having a supersede round, but not having an enormous VC investment where there might be pressure and obviously more resources to hire to future needs. Y'all hire to current needs. I think it's a more healthy way to do it. But obviously it means you scale your team a little slower. And that's sort of the pro and the con there.
I always say it's pros and cons, like to doing it really fast or slow, because there are definitely times when we feel like we're doing a little bit of catch up. Or like, oh, we could have grown maybe if we had this resource or that resource, or there's so many things we can't do now. But I think to your question previously of like, how do you know small dial versus halfway? We try to start things as small as possible, prove them out. And then once you have some data around it, it also makes a much bigger case of like, if this experiment goes really well, then we might have a lot more data say like, hey, we really need like a growth engineer.
I also kind of like how small our team is too. Like there's ability to move really fast too, because we just like really intimately know each other's working style and there's so much alignment. Not to say like having more resources would be fantastic and like having growth engineers and like a whole growth team. But I think there is a lot of value too to our team being as small as it is, because we're able to move fast and we just like can work together really well.
So we've talked about a lot of cool stuff today. We've talked about the company Navattic, what growth means in your team at Navattic, how y'all operate, what your goals are, how you think about strategy, sharing. What do you want takeaways to be for folks who are listening to this? What do you want the audience to take away with them?
One thing that became really apparent to me when I was prepping for this was like, oh, I really need to have really smart answers for all these. And I need to have perfect systems and operating models. And we got stuff. It's not like we're just willy-nillying it all, but also being okay with you're figuring it out. A lot of that is going to be qualitative. You know, sometimes you are going to get derailed by other departments, and that's kind of natural, flexible, especially at this stage. So yes, it's good to have principles and guidance and things you can fall back on. I feel like I often look at these bigger companies and I'm like, oh my God, they have it figured out. It must be perfect there. And then I talk to people there and they're like, it's also a shit show here.
It's a shit show everywhere.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, I agree with that. I think being newer to growth and like newer to Navattic too, it's been fun to just learn and figure things out as we go. And like over time, we're building our process up too and like making it stronger and better. And yeah, I think we're just like learning along the way, which makes it really fun.
Well, I just want to say thank you to you both. This is the end. I have no more official questions, although I might have some unofficial questions. Y'all took the train up. We didn't eat till late. They only had coffee for 2 out of the 3 of us. It's pouring out. We got wet at lunch. So thank you all for coming out and sharing some of your journey and your insights and what you're working on and being vulnerable. I think this is pretty cool that y'all were interested in doing this. One parting question, which is, what question haven't I asked today that you kind of hoped that I would?
One thing I think a lot about is like, what did you, and maybe this is honestly a better question for Raman. Maybe I'm just curious and want to hear Raman's answer to this, but like, what was your expectation of growth? Like when you signed up for this role, what did you think it would be versus what is it actually? Because I think everyone has this perfect idea of how it's going to go. And then the reality is so much different.
Well, that's why I wanted to do this, to service what growth is in the environment that you all are working in, not what is it in whatever other company, because it's such a different thing, right? Growth as a capability is still brand new.
Yeah.
And the edges are not well defined. And at every company, they define it slightly differently. And at larger companies, it means something different than at smaller companies. And at B2C companies, it's different than at B2B. And so that was, to me, part of my push to create this.
I think what I have learned about growth, and especially in this role, is like, it's kind of everything. And I don't think I realized how it touches literally every team. And so that's been really cool because I feel like I've been able to make it my own and like lean into my strengths and be like, okay, I want to be pulling like the data side and I want to get close to product and I want to like also get close to what we're doing in marketing. And I think being able to just blend across and flex across a bunch of different teams and types of thinking has been super cool. It's like almost both zooming out really far and then also zooming in a lot and like being able to do that constantly. And I don't think I realized how much stuff is involved in growth and like how everything kind of touches it.
Well, thank you both. We'll call it there.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Hell yeah. Hey, thanks so much for listening. That is going to be a wrap on the Navattic miniseries. And before you go, I would love to hear what you thought about the series. This is the first time I've done this, and candidly, I'm thinking I may do this again a few times a year. So I would love your feedback on what you liked, what you didn't like, what you wished I would do more of for the future. You can tag me on LinkedIn at Andrew Kaplan, or you can tag the show at Delivering Value Podcast, or you can leave comments either in my Substack, which you can find at media.deliveringvalue.co, or on any of the individual episode pages, which you'll find on YouTube. And if you did enjoy the show, the best thank you would be a share or a review. Both of those signal to the algorithm to surface my show to other folks like you and I. So please help out, share on whatever platforms you currently use, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Otherwise, thanks so much for listening.